Hey everyone. So let's talk about one of the most thrown around words in politics today, populism. You hear it everywhere, right? But what does it actually mean? Well, today we're going to cut through all that noise. We're going to use the work of political scientist Kurt Wayland to build a really clear, powerful way to understand it. Let's dive in.
Okay, so here's the core of the problem. You hear the label populist slapped on leaders from the left, from the right, all over the world. And these leaders, they can have completely different, even opposite economic policies and social views. It makes the term feel, super slippery and inconsistent. How can one word mean so many different things? And this quote from our source, Kurt Wayland, just nails it. He calls populism a political chameleon. It's a perfect analogy, right? Just when you think you've got it cornered, it changes its colors and shows up in a totally new way. But don't worry, today we're going to learn how to spot this chameleon no matter what color it's wearing. So here's our game plan. First, we're going to debunk some common definitions that just don't work, just to clear the air. Then, we'll get to the heart of it, the core strategy that really defines populism. We'll break down the playbook these leaders use, see why it's more of a spectrum than a switch, and then wrap up with why looking at it this way, well, why it matters so much right now.
All right, let's start with a little myth busting. Because according to Wayland's work, to really get what populism is, you first have to be crystal clear on what it isn't. And there are two big misconceptions we need to get out of the way right now.
So, myth number one is this old idea of economic populism. You've probably heard this before. The theory basically goes that populists are just leaders who promise everybody everything. They hand out economic goodies, they overspend like crazy, all to get popular, and they don't care about the long-term damage. But here's the thing, that theory just doesn't fit the facts. Not at all. I mean, look at the 1990s. Leaders who were definitely seen as populists, like Menem in Argentina or Fujimori in Peru, actually did the exact opposite. They imposed super strict, fiscally conservative reforms. On the flip side, a left-wing populist like Evo Morales in Bolivia was known for keeping a tight budget. So the big takeaway here is that populism can't be defined by any one economic policy. It's just not about the money.
Okay, let's move on to myth number two. Now, this one is a bit more current. It's the idea that populism is what's called a thin-centered ideology. Basically, a simple worldview that's all about how populists talk and what they say they believe. And this sets up the most important contrast we're going to talk about today. The ideology approach focuses on the words, the rhetoric, the whole pure people versus the corrupt elite thing. But the political strategic approach that we're digging into today says, forget the words, look at their deeds, look at their actions. It argues the populism isn't a belief system, it's a method, a specific strategy for winning and holding on to power.
And there are huge problems with focusing just on the words. For one, it's way too broad. I mean, one study that used this method actually ended up calling George W. Bush a populist, which just doesn't feel right, does it? But more importantly, it completely misses the central trick of populism. The rhetoric is all bottom-up, power to the people. But the reality? All that power immediately gets funneled to one single top-down personal leader. It's the classic bait and switch.
So, this brings us to the big reveal. If populism isn't about economics and it isn't an ideology, then what on earth is it? Well, it's a strategy, plain and simple. It's not about what they believe, it's all about how they rule.
And here it is. This is Kurt Wayland's core definition. Let me read it out. A political strategy through which a personalistic leader seeks or exercises government power based on direct, unmediated, uninstitutionalized support from large numbers of mostly unorganized followers. Okay, yeah, that's a bit of a mouthful, I know. So let's break down what that actually looks like in the real world.
So how does this strategy actually work? The best way to think about it is like a playbook. A set of very specific moves a leader makes to grab power by just completely ignoring the normal rules of the political game. This table here breaks it down beautifully. See, any political strategy really has two main ingredients. What type of ruler's in charge? Is it one person or a big organization? And what's their main source of power? And look where populism sits, right in that unique little box. It's an individual person whose power comes from sheer numbers, just massive direct support from the people, not from organized groups, big money, or the military. So here's the playbook in action. First, a charismatic leader shows up, usually claiming to be an outsider who is above all the traditional political parties.
Then, they deliberately go around all the normal institutions, parties, unions, you name it, to make a direct appeal to the people, usually through mass media like TV or social media. Their power is built on mobilizing huge numbers of followers. And to keep that connection strong, they create this intense us versus them story, forging a really powerful personal bond where the leader claims to be the one true voice of the people.
But, and this is a really important bit of nuance, not all leaders who are personalistic are actually populists. This strategic definition is so helpful because it lets us draw a really sharp line between two very different kinds of political leaders.
So on one side, you've got the true populist. Their goal is simple: win elections and get power. Their ideology? It's completely flexible. They'll say whatever they need to say to get votes. They are the political chameleons we talked about. But on the other side, you have the extremist, or the ideologue. Their goal isn't power for power's sake, it's ideological purity. Their beliefs are rigid, they're non-negotiable, they'd rather lose an election than compromise their dogma. They're not chameleons, they're true believers.
And that key distinction helps us see that populism isn't just a simple yes or no box you can check. It's not an on or off switch. It's much more useful to think of it as a spectrum, something that can actually be measured in degrees.
This chart makes that spectrum really clear. So up at the top, with a perfect 1.0 score, you have pure populists like Hugo Chavez or Fujimori, who basically built their power from scratch with no constraints. A bit further down, you get leaders like Menem or Marine Le Pen, who were predominantly populist but still had to deal with existing party structures. And then, at the bottom, you have leaders who score a 0. People like Lula da Silva, who is always tied to his organized party, or the rigid ideologue Jean-Marie Le Pen. By this definition, they aren't populists at all.
Okay, so why does any of this matter? Why is looking at populism as a strategy so much more useful? Well, because it takes us from this murky, confusing mess of a concept to a place of real, analytic clarity.
So here are the big takeaways. This strategic view finally explains that trademark volatility and unpredictability you see with so many populist leaders. Because their power is so personal and not based in any stable organization, it can literally pop up overnight and then collapse just as fast. It also gives us a sharp, clear tool to tell the difference between a populist opportunist, the chameleon, and a dogmatic extremist. It just gives us a much better framework for understanding what's really going on.
And this brings us right back to the most important point from Wayland, especially for a topic as slippery as this one. Deeds constitute a firmer and clearer basis of conceptualization than words. In other words, stop listening to what they say and start watching what they do.
So, I'll leave you with this to chew on. If populism is really just a political playbook, a strategy that anyone from any side of the aisle can pick up and use to get power, how does that change the way you see the political world around you?